Thanks for tuning in. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the Ives 3243 and pulling the cars 187, 88, and 89. This was Ives' first enter piece into standard gauge in 1921. Here you have the ad for In Playthings for the Ives, January 1921, with the Ives 3243. Our new line of electric trains on 2.5-inch track. And they have their 1901 model here. This is their 20th anniversary of doing track trains. And they must have been using the same ruler that Lionel did when they introduced their standard gauge, calling it 2-inch, because obviously they were faulty, and Ives was faulty here with 2.5-inch track. So when Ives introduced their trains in 1901, it was a 0 gauge, or O gauge as we call it, and then they entered in 1 gauge late in 1903, which was the high-end trains from competing with Germany. So Lionel had standard gauge all to itself. Ives was doing 1 gauge, but when the Germans pulled out of the American market, thanks to World War I, 1 gauge kind of died. So Lionel had been doing standard gauge, and then in 1915, because of the lack of product coming in from Germany, Lionel got into O gauge, which of course was Ives' territory. So Harry didn't like that. So kind of with the death of 1 gauge, he decided to do a tit for tat and enter into standard gauge with this 3243. And at the time, your only competition really was the Lionel 42. Now, in theory, these are both patterned after the same engine, the New York Central S-Cab. You can credit this one maybe to an S2, S1, and this might be the S3, which had a little longer pilots on it. But again, these are, in theory, patterned after the same engine. Now, when Lionel introduced this initially as a square cab of the 1912 and 1910, and then the round cab in 1912, they really did very little to the line. 1915, they went to O gauge, and that was taking off and doing great, and they did very little innovation, absolutely virtually nothing, to the standard gauge line. These are cars that were pretty much from 1911, 1912, virtually untouched, just using the freight car trucks, the passenger cars. Again, very little innovation. So it was a stagnant line. Could standard gauge gone dormant and they just continued O gauge? Perhaps. But Ives decided to shake that up by bringing in their standard gauge line. So Lionel was not going to take this laying down. March 1921, 2 months after the Ives ad, they immediately announced that they're going to do twin motors on the 42 to increase its pulling power. So that's their big innovation, is to add a second motor here, and now they claim the engine will pull 21 of their freight cars. I assume that's strictly on straight track, because you're not going to do that on a 42-inch curve. Now you can see Lionel proudly announcing this is for standard gauge. Lionel was very fixed on the standard gauge. When they introduced their O gauge, it was the standard O gauge, but here's just standard gauge. In July, Ives was still having an identity crisis with what to call their train gauge. So this standard 2 gauge electric locomotive runs on 2.25-inch track. Again, the ruler was a problem. But nonetheless, that's what they ended up calling it, 2.25-inch gauge. July 1921, the American economy was pretty much in a tailspin right after World War I. It was a major recession, so it was not a good time to bring out new luxury trains, but Ives, never one to be bothered with common sense, decided to open this luxury showroom in Manhattan here, and here's their beautiful layout here, and this is the standard gauge 3243 here, and here's the white Ives over here in the showcase. So they had this beautiful showroom, remodeled it a couple times, and of course they were bankrupt in 7 years. So let's do a little comparison shopping here. Ives was quick to realize that electric trains actually use pantographs. Lionel did not quite figure that out. The Ives big cars are quite nice in length, and they had their long trucks, so their appearance is long and low, as opposed to Lionel's, which are kind of short and bulky. Lionel, to get the roof off, you have to unscrew this to get inside, where Ives is hinged, so you can just lift that right up and get inside. And you notice there's lights inside here. So the cars have rollers, so you actually do that. Lionel didn't have that. You had to string wire from one car to the other. They would quickly change that after Ives' innovation here. So Ives did push the envelope quite a bit, and then the competition was on. So you really have to question, again, if Ives did not get into the standard gauge market, and then, of course, Flyer had to do the same thing a couple years later, and then Dorfin, maybe the classic era may never have happened had the competition not heated up. So thank you very much for watching. This became a very, very popular engine. They made this until 1928, when it was supplanted by the 3245. Thank you. Thanks for watching. If you like what you see, please subscribe. Thank you.